arcade ports are a bit of a rarity these days. But when they do happen, modern ports of classic titles tend to be very much vanilla ports of the originals. So when a port of a modern arcade game like Cruisin' Blast comes along, it very much reminded me of a time not that long ago when developers actually went above and beyond to provide you with an experience that provided much more than just the standard arcade game alone. So come and join me now as we discuss arcade ports in the modern age. Arcade ports used to be the bread and butter of games consoles and home computers back in the day. And when I say back in the day, what I really mean is the 1980s and 1990s. Even through to the 2000s, modern-ish consoles like the PS3 and Xbox 360 would still get the occasional arcade port. In fact, thinking about it now, most of my favourite PS3 games were ports of Sega and Namco arcade games. Stuff like House of the Dead 3, House of the Dead 4, Dead Storm Pirates, Afterburner Climax, Time Crisis 4, Outrun Online Arcade, and Daytona USA. Sometimes you could pick up an arcade port without even realising it. Sega Rally 3 also got a home port, but ended up with a name change en route, and weirdly, no actual recognition of its arcade roots in any of the pre-publicity surrounding it. In fact, I only realised that Sega Rally Online Arcade and Sega Rally 3 were essentially the same game after the proper arcade version got leaked onto the internet a few years back with a crack that made it playable on PC. Venturing into non-Sega and Namco territory, there was also a very nice port of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo that featured lovely hand-drawn graphics. Konami's GTI Club was also on the receiving end of a very lovely HD port, handled by the mighty Sumo Digital. Even a couple of shoot-em-ups I really liked made it onto the PS3 arcade game library, with games like Raiden 4 and R-Type 1 and 2 getting the conversion treatment. Now, this isn't an exclusive list of every port that came out on the system, but these are some of my favourites. In many ways, well for me at any rate, the PS3 really was the ultimate machine for playing some of these titles. Owning a pair of PS Moves made playing the arcade on-rail shooters I mentioned previously an even more enjoyable experience, as it meant you no longer had to put up with the near epilepsy-inducing levels of flashing white light you used to get when you used an old school light gun on a CRT TV. And, as they came as a pair, it meant you always had a spare PS Move for your mate. Not like the old days, when me and a friend would take it in turns swapping between the light gun and a joypad when we used to play Virtua Cop 2 in 2-player mode on the Saturn. On top of this, I was able to play some of those arcade races I mentioned on a console with a wheel that actually felt like the closest I'd come to experiencing the arcade at home for the first time, outside of PC emulation. Now though, unless it's part of some kind of retro compilation, or a Switch Sega Ages game, arcade ports are a bit of a rarity. This isn't that surprising though when you consider that arcades themselves have been on the decline since the start of the 2000s, if not longer. Why would you want to have to leave the comfort of your lovely house and go and stand at an arcade cabinet, rubbing shoulders with a bunch of total strangers and their demon offspring, when you could be playing Grand Theft Turismo 12 on your PS5 in the comfort of your own home on your 100-inch 8K plasma screen TV and 5.1 surround sound, spread out on your chaise longue like the decadent bitch you know you are. But the thing is though, there are a certain subset of gamers, people of a, let's say, certain vintage, and I include myself in that category, that yearn for a return to those sorts of days of gaming. I don't mean the jostling with strangers and their snot-nosed little brats part. I mean games that go back to the simplicity of an arcade title. Something you can pick up and instantly play for a quick blast that lasts from 5 to 30 minutes, like an arcade racer or an on-rail shooter. Something that doesn't require a 2-hour tutorial before you even start the main meat of the gameplay. A tutorial which you then need to keep reminding yourself of every time you fire the game up, because you keep leaving it so long in between goes that you've forgotten how to play it. That's not to say I don't like these types of games. I just often find it hard to fit them in between all the other adult type responsibilities I should be attending to. It's probably also worth mentioning here as well that although arcade ports are not necessarily all that common on modern systems, there are still games released today that very much had their roots tied into the arcade games of the past. Either reimaginings of classic arcade titles, new and improved versions of classic console titles that were inspired by the arcade games of the time, that update the gameplay and polish the graphics up to a modern standard, or all new titles that are inspired by and homage the games that came before them. Now, the only issue with playing an arcade title at home though, is that these machines were only ever really designed to keep you hooked for a short period of time. They wanted you to keep pumping in as many 10p's, 50p's and £1 coins as you could afford in order for you to temporarily maintain that sweet arcade machine dopamine hit. If you were ever to play an arcade title, particularly an older one, all the way to the end on free play, sometimes you'd find they were a bit content light. This is why, when video game developers in the past used to convert an arcade title for a home system, they used to expand and enhance the original gaming experience, adding in things like new stages, new characters, new vehicles, new modes of play and new music. Alternatively, sometimes they'd sell you a compilation of a specific arcade series together as one package. A really good example of this I can think of is Silent Scope Complete, which I used to own on the original Xbox. This brought together the 4 previous Silent Scope arcade games while adding in additional levels, story branches and features. The mindset in how modern ports are handled now is really the main meat of the discussion that I wanted to get into in this video, and how modern arcade ports differ from old ones, and not necessarily in a good way. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this all stemmed from me finding out that when Raw Thrills recently converted their arcade racing title Cruisin' Blast to the Nintendo Switch, they significantly expanded upon the original with brand new stages and vehicles. This is to be commended. I must just add here, I've never actually played the arcade original, so I couldn't actually tell you what those changes are, but this decision by a modern company to significantly expand the content of their original arcade game gets a massive thumbs up from me. See, a lot of arcade ports these days tend to be incredibly vanilla. We've got hardware now that, for the past couple of generations at least, has allowed us to play fully arcade perfect versions of these games. In fact, in most instances, they're not just arcade perfect, they're better than arcade perfect, offering higher resolutions than the originals did back in the day, and in some instances improved frame rates too, but the improved visuals seem to be all these modern ports want to offer. Let's have a look at a few examples to see what I'm really talking about here. The recent Nintendo Switch port of Virtua Racing not only displays the game in HD, but also increases the frame rate of the game from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second. Nice. But if we look back at the PS2 port of Virtua Racing, that version of the game not only boasted enhanced visuals over the arcade original, but also 3 new tracks, a GP mode and a selection of new cars. Yeah, the handling in that version was a bit iffy and it had some terrible pop-up, but new stages and vehicles are the things I want to see. I mean, even the humble 32X version of Virtua Racing Deluxe got extra cars and tracks added. I played the original Virtua Racing so much in emulation via MAME that when you offer such a vanilla experience, no matter how beautiful it looks, you lose some of the incentive for me to purchase it. Well, you would if I actually owned a Switch at any rate. I still don't get why all this generation's Sega Ages games have remained Nintendo exclusive. I'll give full props to M2 though, the guys that were responsible for the port, for their inclusion of an 8-player split-screen mode on the Switch version of Virtua Racing, That is a very, very nice addition. The Switch Sega Ages port of Outrun is another example I'd like to use in comparison to its PS2 counterpart. Yeah, it's got some nice added content like some really good extra music and some options that affect the handling and the colour of your fake Ferrari as you play through it. But the PS2 game added in a whole new arrange mode with a ton of extra stages, which effectively doubled the size of the game. Ages ago, I randomly came across an idea for an Outrun hack online someone had, called Outrun Nights. The idea behind it was that it would still look like something that was playing on Sega System 16 hardware, but none of the stages would take place during the day. The first would be at dusk, the last is at dawn, with the iconic red Ferrari Testarossa convertible being traded in for a black Lamborghini Countach. I mean, how fucking awesome would an addition like that have been? Looking at the Switch indie title, 80s Overdrive, it looks like it probably wouldn't have been that difficult to create something from scratch that could have passed for something running on Sega's old superscalar hardware. I don't want to seem like I'm just picking on the Switch Sega Ages line though. So let's have a look at an arcade port from the PS3 days that is probably one of my favourites ever. When Daytona USA was ported to the PS3 and Xbox 360, we got what is arguably the best ever version of the game. The visuals were once again upscaled into HD, and the controls perfected for the best home experience, whether you were using a pad or a racing wheel. But aside from that, that was it. Sure, there are a few challenges you could do, and the online multiplayer was great, but where was the local multiplayer? Where were the extra stages and bonus cars? All those things were present before this in the Dreamcast version of Daytona USA 2001. I mean, hell, they managed to add an additional 5 stages into the mix compared to the arcade machine's original 3. Now, I'm not daft. I know that these modern titles are generally budget releases, and that unlike the ports of old that were built from the ground up, things like the Switch port of Outrun and Virtua Racing and the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of Daytona probably involved emulation of the arcade hardware of some sort. But how much better would these games have been if that extra bit of effort was made to enhance this content in the significant ways that the ports of old did? When Outrun 2 dropped on the original Xbox back in the day, as well as all the extra mission modes and the like it too received bonus cars and 2 whole new courses that are made up of the stages from Scud Race and Daytona USA 2, all recreated from the ground up in the OG Xbox's Outrun 2 game engine. Just imagine if the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of Daytona USA didn't just come with arcade perfect recreations of the iconic 3 tracks, but we got a selection of completely brand new ones, faithfully recreated to mirror the visuals of their Model 2 board counterparts. Now cast your imaginations that little bit further still, dear viewer, and imagine if Sega had just gone that extra mile and included a 4-player local split screen option in as well. How incredible would that have been? Now, with the announcement by Sega that they're going to be ending the Sega Ages line soon, some of what I'm saying might sound like a bit of a moot point, as in, well, that ship's sailed now. But this is why the release of Cruise and Blast, replete with all its extra gameplay content, seems like such a ray of hope. Because there's such a wealth of unconverted arcade titles out there that could still benefit from this treatment. Looking back through Raw Thrill's own back catalogue, you've got H2 Overdrive, a fantastically fun spiritual successor to Hydro Thunder. If they released this, beefed it up with some new stages and boats, added in some great local and online multiplayer, I'd snap it up in an instant. Also, a game like that isn't specifically tied into a Nintendo IP like Cruisin' is, so they could make it multi-system and then just sit back and watch the cash roll in. Well, in theory at any rate. You'd buy a Hydro Thunder game, wouldn't you? Of course you would, you're someone who's got good taste in games. There are other older arcade titles of theirs I'd also love to see get the home port treatment. Things like Terminator Salvation and their 2 Aliens games, although I suspect that might not be quite so straightforward due to licensing issues. Sega themselves are sat on a huge back catalogue of unconverted gold, like the aforementioned Scud Race and Daytona USA 2. The fact that the latter has never seen any kind of home release has always struck me as particularly egregious. When you add in the equally never converted Sega Race TV, you've got the makings of a lovely little Sega retro racing compilation right there. A little bit of techno tomfoolery would surely be enough to get around those pesky car licenses you no longer own, Sega. A few little alterations of the bodywork, like in the Switch Outrun port, that suddenly saw the iconic Ferrari red Testarossa changed into a generic sports car. Let's call it a Fakari. So come on, Sega, Namco, Konami, and all the other producers that used to produce awesome arcade games back in the day. We're all thrilled of showing you how you should be doing it. How's about you start bringing some of your old arcade classics home with a bit of style? Coincidentally, I can't help but notice we're not far off the 30th anniversary of Daytona USA now, Sega. If you needed a little bit of inspiration to get you started there. Hey, so if you made it all the way to the end of the video, thanks for watching this far. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button, maybe think about hitting the subscribe button too while you're at it. And also, don't forget to leave a comment, let me know what your thoughts are on the arcade ports of the modern era. So this is the end of the video now, I'm going to wrap things up and hopefully catch you again sometime soon. Take care.